Hi everyone, and welcome to the PmP monthly review for June, take two. We
July,
recorded a
take two.
2 hour version of this video yesterday, packed the gills with some choice rambling, which unfortunately was eaten by gremlins, so you'll never be able to hear it. But we're back with the remastered version of it. Might be a little bit less back and forth between us than usual today, but that's because we sort of already know what everyone else is going to say. So we're just going to kick straight through it. And I'm going to kick off with our Chaos Lord on Carcadrag by Brian Bauer. So you're looking for contest in finishing time, unfortunately, and better shading on the armor and the fire effect on the sword. So the shading on the armor is very nice. We all like the kind of the tones you use, the more purple for the shadows and the kind of more vibrant blue for the lights. There's a very distinctive directionality to it. Like you can see that the light's coming from in front and maybe to his right as well. Um, and you've got all the elements are picked out very nicely because he's a big kind of dude. And the environmental shadows are nice on the cloak as well, that there's purple kind of tied into everything in the whole thing. Just on the panels themselves in the armor, in a few places it looks like maybe you were kind of overthinking it a little bit. Like so the beastie's kind of back right leg, there's like there's like a couple of panels, one facing back and up and one facing back and just back. And it'd be nice to see like some kind of variation in those. They're the solid shadow color, so you could then have some kind of edge highlighting or panel modulation on those. Just bring it up more to where your mid tone for your lighter areas would be, just to show that there's other light sources there. So you have the darkest dark reserved for the deepest shadows. And general, like in a lot of other places, it looks very good. Um, and just be a little careful on as well being too symmetrical with the way the lights are. So some of it looks a little bit like you have it split the panel right down the middle, and that gives it a kind of two-tone look, which can be a bit confusing because people do two-tone schemes for Space Marines anyway. I've never seen anyone do it on a Chaos Warrior, but I'm sure somebody does. Um, the Flaming Sword looks really good. We were all very happy with that. I think it sells like exactly like you want it to do. You could add if you wanted to have like char and like black spots and stuff in it, you could, but they're completely not necessary. It totally reads as a flaming weapon. Um, and the just sort of general notes on it. The base is nice. The kind of chaotic battlefield. How you've got his axe on the ground and some like heads of some dudes as well. The snow is a bit uniform in the way it's placed, and it's kind of weird in that it's like a blanket of snow, but it's also kind of rough. Um, and it looks like it kind of all fell at once, but there's under the beastie, there's none of it, so it's kind of a bit obvious you kind of just couldn't get at it there. So generally, snow looks a bit better if it's broken up more. And I'd recommend checking out James Wapple. He's got some great videos on making kind of slushier looking snow, and then you can kind of dot it around, and it'll look more like it's melted in places. And that way, you don't need to be worried about it being on the dude as well, because it doesn't look like it just fell a minute ago. Uh, the cloak on the rider is really nice. The way you got the red in it and the purple shadows. It could be maybe a little bit smoother in terms of the transition. The red glaze, like if you use a red glaze to kind of even it out, that'll work very effectively because the red being so transparent. And then also the beast doesn't necessarily look like he's had as much attention to him as the rider. That's like fine. I've done one of these and like you get kind of fed up with the amount of details and gubbins on them. So if that was intentional, it's fine if you're looking for focusing on the rider and the armor. But for a competition piece, kind of every part of it has to be brought to the same standard. So we'll probably say this a couple of times, but if that's the case, maybe think about picking a simpler model for your competition piece, because then you don't have to worry about if you're not interested in painting the mount, then pick a dude who was not a mount or has a smaller mount. And the conversion is really good because I'm pretty sure no one else noticed that this is. I only knew because I've painted this exact model that he doesn't come with a shield. That's off some Chaos Knight kit, and it's pretty much seamless the way you have it added on there. So great work all around. Is there anything I missed? Cool.
I was just going to chip in that a little bit more separation of elements, a bit more definition, like between the scales on top of his head, would go a long way. A couple of other areas as well, like the scales that are on the rest of his body and like around the teeth, could maybe do with a little bit of a darker line between them. And then the horns and the talons look like they could use a lot more detail as well because they look kind of like a solid colour pretty much. A little bit's been done to the horn, but it could go further, and the talon certainly a lot further. Again, for competition, those are the small details that you really need to pick out and bring up to the same level as Matt said. Alex?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the light scales, they look much better than the bigger ones, but that's just
Yeah.
aside.
Yeah, no, just similar things on sort of a bit more sort of separation of details in terms of recess shading and things. Like you've generally got edge highlights in the right places. They could be a little bit brighter just to help make them a bit more obvious and help break up those edges. But I think where you're mainly lacking in terms of separation is just in sort of that sort of sharp dark lining and things. And yeah, the biggest thing that stands out to me here really is the snow. Again, saying contest pieces, so we sort of want to focus on every element being not necessarily to the same high standard as what your focus is. You can have a focal point that's done more detailed, but things like the base, that's part of selling the story. You know, a bit of snow on the BC's feetsies where it's been sort of walking through it, or you know, and having that snow look like it's been sort of blown up by the wind. If it's that more sort of dusty snow, or like Matt said, that more slushy snow, as sort of an alternative there, than it just sort of looking like it's fallen in one big sheet of snow on top of everything. But yeah, no, that's about it there. It's a quite nice piece, very nice, vibrant color scheme.
Cool. All right, let's move up. Gin Fritter's Juvenile Saurid that he's painted very, very quickly in just 2 hours from trim, prime, and paint. So notes I had for this one was very, very good for 2 hours work. Nice, fun little dude. I like the variation that's in the scales. So you've got some black and some brown and some green, and obviously the yellow and the ruddiness to it. And that all looks really good. It looks like there's kind of an accidental pattern we noticed when we were looking at this yesterday. So if you wanted to go further, it didn't really say if you wanted to or not, but it'd be cool to like further define those with like some black lines to make that pattern stand out, like a diamond sort of jagged pattern going down the spine. That'd be really awesome. But I think generally just a couple of tips just to push it a bit further would be more detail and smoothness on the talons, on the hands and feet. Just to sort of give them a little bit more definition and variation too. Good work with the eyes. That's really nicely done eye with the red pupil and the yellow iris and really, really dark around it. Looks great. And then the other thing was possibly just to push some dark tones around on the undersides of things, like under the chin and the arms, tail, just to add sort of a bit of volumetric highlighting to it. But overall, for 2 hours work, it's really, really good. So, oh yeah, it looks a bit glossy on the top as well. So again, depending on what the goal was with this, then, you know, a coat of matte varnish would go a long way as well. So, yeah, there you go, Jin. Nice one. Thanks for submitting that one. That's cool. Did I miss anything?
Yeah, no, I would just add there, in terms of, you know, if you're aiming for a sort of quick, almost like a speed paint project, just something that adds maybe 30 seconds to a minute to your sort of time there would be zenithaling it, just to get the most out of that sort of contrast, so you've got that underside nicely shaded, where it's a little bit sort of similar in tone, where you've got the contrast settling between sort of the top of the model and the bottom.
Yeah, and I think in terms of like set or looking to get a kind of organic and watercolor look, like it's definitely really successful. Like that's what it looks like. And it's good to be, you know, setting yourself a target. Someone said faster is gooder, so it's always good if you can get up to a certain result in a shorter amount of time. Well, you can always add on more afterwards. So there is no cheating in miniature painting. And 2 hours, like from start to finish, I spent 2 hours cleaning a dude before. So, great job.
Yeah, moving up then, to Robin Hagblom's little high elf dude. So just sort of main focus on again, sort of looking for display competition level feedback, and particularly the NMM here. So overall, I'd say it's a very, very nice piece. I think the NMM is really nice in general. I'd say that the steel is painted a little bit better. It feels like you've got more, you've put more time into that. You know, with your reflected colours, sort of on the sword, you've got that magenta. In the back, you've got this almost sort of sky earth, chromy, environmental reflection. But we're not really getting any of that environmental colour or anything in the gold. So it feels like there's been less attention there for a competition piece on something where, clearly here the focus of the piece, what you're showing off is how good your NMM is, how good your understanding of light and volume is, which is kind of why NMM is a big thing in competitions. And it feels like you've sort of pulled your punches a little bit and sort of not done that in the gold. Something else that stands out in the gold is on his bracelet, you've got this sort of secondary reflection light, and we don't have that really anywhere else in the model. You've got it a few places on the helmet and on the sword, but the rest of the metals seem to be sort of one highlight. So it just feels a little bit out of place having that there. Either sort of going it all in on everywhere having those secondary reflections, which is how metal works, or pulling it back and making it a bit more sort of stylized with just the one sort of major reflection across all the surfaces. Either works, but having that secondary reflection just in the one element there, that one sort of volume, just feels a little bit out of place. And my other thing is because of how bright and intense you've got that highlight on his helmet, it pulls the attention away from the face a little bit. It's quite, the face is arguably the focal point of most models. Clearly here you're going to show off your non-metallics, which are great. But just bringing that focus into the face, it's a hard model to get that on though, because you've got most of the face covered. But just sort of popping up those highlights, just to bring it out that little bit more, just to help snap that focus in. Just besides that, again, that comes down to choice of model for competition. Something with a face that's most obscured, maybe not the best choice for a competition piece. You want something with an open pose, so it's easy to sort of get your brush in everywhere, and something that's going to really lend itself well to showing off what you're able to do in terms of composition and focus. No, I think the color scheme is really nice as well. That sort of, it's not too cold a blue, so it works well with that magenta there. And I think it's well balanced around. It's very sort of old school in the style, but it works for the model. I think overall it's a very, very accomplished piece there. I'd probably maybe pop some of the secondary highlights up just a little bit brighter, particularly with that reflected light in the sword though, just because it comes out a little bit not metal there. Even if it's just a little edge highlight along the edge, if you don't want to bring that secondary highlight as high as the main one on the sword further up, just something to make it still sing as metal there. But yeah, no, it's a very, very nice piece. I think it'll look nicer with the base complete, and hopefully that'll sort of tie everything together just that little bit more. Well done there. Jim?
Covered all my points, especially about the secondary reflections in the metal. My argument would be, you're going for competition, don't pull back. You've got to add secondary reflections everywhere. That would be my advice for that. And then just highlight placement on the sword. There's some places where they aren't opposing each other. So like on the sword, top tip there is very, very bright. So it should be the complete opposite of that. The deepest shadow should be directly opposite that. It's happened in some places, but just not everywhere. Don't think it's a major issue on this because it does sell as metal. It's doing very well. Same on the backlit. Both sides of the tip, either side of that ridge, are both really bright. So yeah, if you just juxtapose those next time, just for maximum points. But yeah, overall stunning, and I love the polished helmet back bit, sky earth reflection thing. I think that looks awesome. So yeah, nice one, Robin. Matt?
Yeah, again, super technically accomplished. I absolutely love the kind of like chrome looking helm and the sword. It's like very classic. And really shows that you know how to fit your kind of distorted looking highlights on things, and that's great. And again, like we said, kind of think about maybe you were making I'd say your strong suit is your flat panels, like the sword and the helm, and then the kind of brigandine armor that he's wearing or scale mail isn't quite. It's not. I mean, it still looks really good and everything, but maybe if you had a different model that didn't have those same material in two different kind of forms, that's kind of making things harder for yourself. And similarly with the gold kind of cloth trim and then the gold armor, you could choose a different color or material for those if you don't want to have to paint every single square centimeter of your model in NMM. But I mean, if that makes you happy, I think we're pretty good at it. So makes me happy to see it. Great work. Okay, I'm going to carry up here. Lucas Crowling, more NMM. First bust as well. Great work. Busts are always, they're very challenging and also very rewarding. I think you've done a great job on your Monkey King here. So just kind of general, we'll start with the NMM. Generally, I think it looks very good what you have for his kind of shoulder pad and his all the metal-y elements, but it doesn't look very metallic the way it is now. Looks more like some kind of like an ivory material, and that's for two reasons. One is your color choice, and the other is the way you've placed the lights and shadows. And also, it's worth noting like this is a really difficult piece to practice on because it's a bust, and because when you're doing non-metallic metal, every surface on it adds an additional challenge. And if you were to count how many different surfaces and facets are on this guy, it's like something outlandishly high. Um, because not only do you have to have the right run of light on each surface, then they have to match up with each other, and it kind of all works or it doesn't work. In a couple of places, it's definitely looking towards that kind of like illustrative NMM, like on this strap that's coming down here. There's like the parallel lines of that look more metallic, and also on the rings on his staff on his back, they're definitely going the right direction. But in a lot of places, we've kind of done a lot of applying washes, which can be a good way of getting shading in, but you need to be also placing shadows where you want them, and lights as well. So like if you think of like a saucepan, it's not like that the inside of the saucepan is just going to be black and then the outside of it's going to be all silver. It has different lights in different places, and it changes as the angle you look at it. So if you look at his ring thing on his torso, it's got a black line all the way around in all the recesses, but those recesses are facing in all different directions. So it makes it sell more as a different surface rather than a polished steel. It still looks good, but it doesn't read as metal. And also, I think you need, in terms of your color choices, a lot more ochre to it. So ochre is kind of like if gold had a color in the absence of all the lights that are shining on it, it would be something like ochre. So I'd recommend looking up Angel Giraldez has a pretty short, succinct, like beginner's guide to gold NMM, and you could just copy the colors in that. Richard Gray has a whole load of them. They tend to be longer form. There's no correct way of painting gold, but there's a lot of different recipes that work, and it's good to kind of explore those and see which ones work out for you. The bust itself is looking nice. I really like the atmosphere, the way it's kind of monochrome, and he's got a very kind of dour expression, and it fits together with that kind of more muted kind of color palette. The hair on his head has a nice run of sheen to it. The highlights are a little bit rough looking, so you could either, if you're dry brushing them, having less paint on your dry brush and much more applications. Something like a soft makeup brush tends to give you a smoother application for dry brushing, or you can use glazes of your mid-tone to smooth it out. It'd also be nice, you could have like a different, maybe like a more hazel kind of brown in there to add some more color to it, just through glazes as well. And then there's a bit of an issue in terms of his fur, in that he's got hair and he's got fur and he's got skin, but the fur and the skin are very similar in tone. So it's kind of hard to differentiate them. So if the fur itself was darker, that would maybe make it a bit easier to see, kind of that they're different areas. And if unless you're going for the idea that he's completely covered in fur and it's like thicker in places, but then you don't have the kind of texture to like his shoulders and things to show that it's got very fine fur on there. So just you could differentiate those through color, and that would probably make it a bit easier for you overall. But great work on your first bust, and looking forward to seeing more of them in the future. Do you guys want to chip in anything on there?
Yeah, so just one other thing was on the where you've highlighted and shaded the muscles, is you've got quite a lot of the same tones across the whole area. So I'm looking at the photo that's from his camera left side, where you can see sort of his armpit, and you can sort of see that you've basically got two colors there of your highlight color and then your shadow color, and it's the same tone sort of in the recess under his pec as in his armpit, as in the bottom of some of his I don't know what the name of those muscles are, but the muscles down the side of his sort of torso there. The
Serratus
underside of his arm.
anterior is what those are called.
That one. It's sort of all of your shadow is sort of focused right into the deep recesses, and that's not quite how muscles work. Sort of in general, you want a full range of value from the underside of one muscle all the way up to the highlight touching the bottom of the next muscle above it, and sort of keeping that consistent volumetric highlighting across the piece. Because at the moment you've got the same color as for the highlight of is that muscle that Jim just named, as the mid-tone on his pec, as the shadow on his arm, with only the recesses picked out. So it just doesn't quite have that flesh-like look. For a first bust, though, that's a way you might highlight and shade a 32mm figure, just picking out the recesses. So I think that's just an adjusting of medium, adjusting of scale thing, and going forward, just something to keep in mind a little bit more. But overall, I think for a first bust, it's quite a decent attempt there. I know my first bust was not like this, so well done with that.
All right, cool. Cheers, Lucas. Moving up then to Alexis Bonner with a little beastie from the swamp. Tried to create some interesting texture with just the brush. Awesome work for just the brush, we said yesterday. Which element seems better, leather, wood, skin? We couldn't decide, I don't think, which one looks better, because they all look really, really fantastic. The skin has got some lovely, lovely tones to it. Great contrast in the sort of shadows and the highlights. The transitions are very smooth and believable. Already pinky tones around joints, elbows on the beast, which is great. Missed opportunity to include that on the rider, though. So we could have like bashed ankles, grazed knees and elbows, a little bit more redness in the toes. Can't see his face, so nothing much doing there. The leathers was super, super awesome. That looks like there's kind of different types of it, but it's scratched and hashed nicely. It's highlighted very smoothly. So that's all looking really, really good. Definitely sells like leather. A right amount of distress as well for it, being in this environment. Lots of things on him, around him. He's moving through the swamp. There'd be branches and twigs and stuff scratching and scraping. This carriage on his back would be moving around. There's lots of things dangling, hitting, scratching. So yeah, it's good weathering. The metals as well, looking really, really nice. The corroded stuff, nice old rust plus new rust, looks really good, nice and grimy. And we were saying yesterday how this kind of looks like some sort of magical armor that they're wearing, which isn't subjective to the corrosion. That's kind of the effect that you've sold here. So if that was intentional, nicely done, amazing. If it wasn't intentional, then just say it was, because it's very believable for this. Really, really great work overall. I think the only pushback really from composition wise, it's all very, very strong, apart from the tongue. It's a bit of a saturated solo instance of this blue, so it's a bit it looks a little bit misplaced. So you could fix that either by desaturating it very heavily with some more highlights, kind of graying it out, or taking some like purpley pinky tones into it, just to mute that blue back a bit, or just switch it up for a regular mouthy, tonguey kind of tone. It's cool that you've gone for something interesting. You could maybe even push it a little more to sort of the colour of the armour, maybe, but not that saturated. It's not a massive piece of the sculpt as a whole. So, but at the minute, it's yanking quite a lot of attention. So then on from there, the wood was really, really nice as well, using the green tones in there, a variety of green tones as well, to sell the fact that it would be kind of rotting and wet and just aged in general. So that was a really, really nice touch, and it integrates it nicely into the base as well. I think we were saying a few things about the base, weren't we? Was that you saying that, Alex, yesterday?
Yeah, so I was just saying that I think the base is really sort of it's well made. I like how what you've done with it in terms of sort of selling that setting and selling the atmosphere. It just feels a little bit almost too uniform in terms of the colors. Particular land and nature in general is very chaotic, particularly sort of a dark, sort of grungy, rotty, sort of swamp type landscape. So it just feels like you've almost got sort of two tones of green there, your main one, and then this dark one that you've got around some of the sort of grassy bits and some of the rocks and things. So for me, I'd like to see just a little bit more variation in terms of the colours, just sort of almost sort of roughly wet blending it and making it wet around there with maybe some, taking that main base sort of yellowy, greeny colour that you've got, mixing in just a small amount of some of the other colours around the model, so it's not going to clash compositionally. So a little bit of that orange in there, a little bit of that sort of more skin tone goblin-y green, a bit of the brown tones that you've got in the wood, and literally just having a few mixes of slightly polluted green with those other colours and just slapping that about a bit and getting a bit of variation there. Or another way might be mixing some random colours, wet blending those on the base first and then using a filter of the green, but just getting a little bit more colour in there just because nature isn't quite as uniform as you've painted it to be. But then again, painting something to be random and chaotic is very, very difficult for us as humans because our brains don't like that. So that's not the biggest of deals. It's a really minor nitpick, but just because you've done such a nice job of the painting of the model there, it feels a little bit sort of almost like a missed opportunity on the base there because you've got lots of interference colors and things and colorful shadows and stuff on the actual model itself. But a very minor thing there. That's not the biggest deal in the world. It's a very, very nicely painted piece.
Yeah, we kind of gushed about it even more yesterday, to be honest with you. I really like, just to say, not push back or anything, that it really shows how much you enjoyed the piece. That like, yeah, it has so much detail to it, and it seems like you were like interested in every bit. Like, there's nothing on it that looks like you kind of just painted it for the sake of it, which is something that I fall into all the time. And you seem like someone who's interested in basing. So if you wanted something for a bit of your own interest, there's like a channel called Paper Cuts, Paeper Cuts, and he's this Dutch guy, and he does all these dioramas. A lot of them are kind of swampy stuff, and he actually builds his scenery as if it was built in real life. So like he'll do all the soil, and then he'll do like leaf litter, and then he'll do plants like actually on top of each other, covering bits of it up, and it gives it this like super organic look to it because that's kind of how the environment will come to be in reality. So that's just something you might be interested in. Cool. Alex, are you up next from Michael Zito?
Yes, I believe so. Michael Zito. I'm not gonna. I'm
You
just
didn't
gonna
even
put.
need to this time.
Yeah. Yeah, looking at this printed piece, Nameless King. So I think did we say it was a Dark Souls character?
Yeah, it starts off with 3.
Yeah, so very atmospheric. And looking at general critique and sort of looking at the different textures and how the NMM works. So 130 mil, very big. I'm going to assume that you've scaled that up in the printing. One of the things we sort of looked at, I mentioned yesterday, was that it feels a little bit chunky in places. Just it's a really sort of out of your control thing in terms of the sculpt, but just in the printing, the sort of the cloth for his scarf, it's very, very thick and chunky at the back. Sort of these sort of fatty edges there that you could just sort of bevel out, just taking a blade and sort of not obviously now that you've painted it, but in pieces that you might scale up in terms of printing in the future, just sort of leveling those down with a sort of a scalpel blade during that sort of cleaning phase before priming, just to make it not so chunky, just because it sort of breaks that suspension of reality that we have when we look at these models. And just sort of doesn't quite help with that, but that's just a minor thing there. So looking at sort of textures first, I'm a big fan of the way that you've done the texturing on the bluish grey fabric on the back. Those little sort of scriptures around it in the highlights and around the edges. I think it helps to sell that material. And the leather texturing as well on his little straps. That's really, really nice. Sort of it sells as leather. My critique there would be sort of bring that in a little bit more. It feels like you've held back and have that texturing just around the edges of leather. And leather does crack and weather more at the edges, but it's also going to crack and weather anywhere where the leather's flexing. And on straps like that, they're going to sort of wave and flex in the motion of the character and in sort of any sort of movement. So I'd expect to see a bit more cracking and texturing across the whole piece of the leather, sort of in the middle as well, rather than just being focused at the edges. But that's a relatively minor thing. It sells as leather quite happily. Where the texture to me doesn't sell as well is again on that sort of scarf fabric. I'm not sure what it's meant to be. It feels like you've just sort of highlighted it as a fabric, which is fine. The volumes are highlighted nicely, but you know, if you're intending it to be like a wool or a cotton or something that's sort of a bit more sort of stipply, having those be a bit more overt. If it's meant to be like a woven fabric, like linen or something, having that sort of hashing there to make it just a little bit more obvious what texture it is you're going for. You know, 130 scale, very, very big. So it would be nice to see that a little bit more obviously. It's a scale where you can play with the sort of textures a little bit more, even more so than 75 mil. So it's still at that scale where it's a bit of an artistic interpretation of what the fabric texture would be, but it would be nice to see some more there to make it more obvious. And then looking at the non-metallics, a few places that I think it really, really works is his little head piece crown thing, and the hilt of and sort of upper end of the sort of handle end of his weapon, and especially well done on the bracer, his little bracelet there. That sells really well. I think the color palette for it and the sort of volumetric highlighting there is a huge success, particularly that secondary bounce reflection. It really, really sells as metal. You could probably pull out that detailing and sort of brocading along the sort of middle part there with some edge highlights and light catches, but you've done the right thing there of paying attention to the general volume rather than trying to highlight it all individually first. And you've done the same on the back of his chest plate there. It's a really nice sort of line of highlight down it, with each edge then picked out with the edge highlights. It looks like one big volume, which is where I think the front of his chest plate doesn't sell quite as well. It still sells as metal in terms of you've got all those light catches and glints and sort of the full gamut of contrast and value that we like to see, but it just feels a little bit confused in terms of there's so many little fiddly bits there, and you've highlighted each one as an individual volume, so the light's scattered everywhere. Whereas something like that, if you do what you did on the bracer and think of that one chest plate as almost like a flat volume, highlight it like that initially, and then go in and do your recess shades and your glint catches and all those things to pick out the individual parts, it would sell a little bit better. It'd be less confusing to the eye. Like I say, it still sells as metallic, but as pieces of metal that are all being lit by different light sources. So it's just not got that consistency of the light there. And then the sword blade itself, like I say, the hilt and all that sort of little bit of detailing around the bottom of the blade, that's really nice. That works really, really well. But the blade itself, I'm not sure if it's meant to be metallic, um, or if it's meant to be some sort of almost like a power sword type material, or a hot, almost like a flame type sword, or
Yeah,
what.
I think it is. I was just looking at it. I think it's like a lightning sword is the idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so if it's that, it's fine. It looks great. It works really well. If it's meant to be metallic, though, it doesn't look it. But the fact that you've shown elsewhere that the gold is your non-metallic gold you can paint so well. The fact that that looks so different, it makes it obvious that I think it's not meant to be that. Um, but because of how close the color palette is, it looks almost as though you've tried and failed in what you're doing there. Even though I think what you have done is success for what you're aiming for, but maybe mixing the color palette up even more, or doing something even more different, just to make it extra obvious that it's not a close attempt at metallics. But I think if you're going for a character from a game who has a sword that looks like that, it's a bit hard to work with within those parameters. But it's a very, very nice piece overall. I think your metallics are a good success here. And yeah, that's a very, very nice piece. Jim?
Yeah, well said on all the metals. I don't think there's anything else to add from what we said yesterday on the metals at all. I was going to mention the hair. I think it's hair as opposed to smoke. It's a bit tough to tell, to be honest. It's kind of a bizarre sculpt for either of them. But I think you're going for white hair. So if that is the case, then it's a bit too white, if that makes sense. So if you're going for painting white, anything, fabric or metal or hair or whatever, um, you don't want this much actual white in there. You only need roughly 50% of it to be white, whereas this is kind of, I'd maybe hazard a guess at like 70 or 80% white. So you need to bring in more of the greys, running the gamut down all the way, running the full contrast for it. It's especially noticeable on the back actually. So like under here, you need to volumetrically shade it more. There is some there, but you just need to go further because so much of this is just flat white, that it's not got the punch to it. It's not got the contrast that you could still get out of this sculpt. So yeah, that was my only other main point. Oh, and Cool Cloud as well. I think you did really nicely on that as well. So yeah, well done there, Michael. Matt?
No, I think it looks great. I think it's very true to the games, and it's also very hard. Like Dark Souls has lots of environmental lighting, and a guy like this, where he's all metallic, like it's really hard to pull it off. But like this is totally recognizable as the character it's meant to be, which is pretty tricky because in that game, characters look completely different if you look at one picture and another because there's all these colored lights and stuff in the environments. But I think you've done a great job altogether. And like if you're going for textures, like all the textures more or less read as different stuff, even though they're all quite close in tone. So great work. Okay, our dwarves, Fellowship of Dwarves. Just some squats from Scott Allen. Um, love them. They're cool. Very characterful. And I love like they've all got kind of they're in a uniform, but they've got all their gear is kind of individualized, like they're a team of specialists. Um, the sunglasses are like extremely good. They've got a cool, like stylized look to them, and they just make them look like, yeah, we're badass. We've got badass sunglasses. That's just how we are. Um, and also the color composition is extremely good. The way you've got like Jim, I think was saying about how they got red helmets and they got red elbow pads, and it makes it very easy to focus on their face. And all the faces are really well painted and again really characterful. So you did a great job there in kind of keeping those red elements there consistent throughout the sculpts to make us focus on the correct piece of the model. And I think it's 100% draws the eye in as expected. Just things that you could maybe improve on. Um, some of the armor, the black parts of it look a little bit chalky in places. Like on Bomber, he's got like kind of chunkier, kind of. It can be a bit tricky when you're working with black and dark gray. Like it sells as kind of black armor, but just be careful with that. The size of the highlights and kind of they can get a bit chalky at times because the paints that you're using. Also, you have I really like all the painted on details like the kind of slot machiney looking gun barrel or magazines and the hazard stripes and stuff. But on your main guy, it's not Thorin. No, it is Thorin. He's got that kind of power the glove thing, and it's obviously several plates, and then it has a hazard stripes painted over it, and it's a bit confusing to the eye because you've got like a painted line that kind of runs over multiple objects, and then it ends up looking kind of crooked. And if you imagine, and even if you're doing that in real scale, like it will be very hard to get your brush up and around it, and will come out looking wonky. So you might be better off just like making it so that the hazard stripes are only on like one of the kind of panels of his arm and not running over the bolts as well. Like the way you have it on, is it Killy? Great name for your heavy weapons guy. Killy on his drum, he's got hazard stripes there. That looks much better than having like hazard stripes across the entire bit of the drum. Also the the guns themselves are a bit glossy in places, and it looks kind of weird in that you've got edge highlighting, but then you've got like natural light reflecting off the kind of cylindrical form of the guns. So you could map that out, or you could go for more of a volumetric style and things. Like we can kind of see it on their gloves as well. They have those kind of cylindrical highlights on them that are from the lights in the room. If they're for tabletop, to be honest with you, it can be good to have that, but it's a bit confusing that you have otherwise a very kind of Games Workshop edge highlighting focused style of highlighting, and then some of it is kind of glossier in places. Um, that was it. I really like them. They're just super fun.
Yeah, so just the one thing that I'd add there is you've sort of gone all in on this. Well, you've not gone all in, sorry, on the sort of edge highlighty style. So if we go with looking at which one? Bomber. Here we go. This is a good example of it. You've got there's quite a few elements where you've got pretty much flat midtone and then edge highlight, like the armor panels and the leather straps and the blue of the gun, and the red of the helmet. But then his green fabric there, you've got it highlighted almost volumetrically. So I'd just say sort of picking one style or the other, just so that it's a little bit more consistent throughout. Just to give it in sort of Thorin is another example of this. You can see it on a little bit of almost volumetric highlight on some parts of his armor, but other parts are just edge highlighted. So there's no right or wrong style. I think particularly on these models, that more old school Games Workshop just edge highlighting style might work almost better than trying to go volumetrically, just because that's sort of how the models are sculpted. It really takes well to that style. So just sort of going with one or the other rather than mixing and matching how you're doing your highlights will help it look a little bit more consistent. And it feels like in places there's a lack of recess shading. So all of your highlight is focused on the edges, which means that some of these recesses, sort of Keely's sort of gun there is a good example of this, where you've got these two blue panels meeting, and you've got a highlight along this edge, and then where they meet, you've got no recess shade. So just sort of popping that on there, just to make it that little bit more defined, break up that sort of those shapes a little bit better. But overall, I think they're really fun little dudes. Yeah, I think that's pretty much everything from me. Jim?
Yeah, covered pretty much everything. I just got two things to say really. The first one is just the basing, just same level as attention that you've put into some other elements, just to bring the base up, like get the actual material right up to the edge in all places. So there's some areas where kind of the black from the rim has gone up onto the base, and it just looks a little bit messy, to be honest. And then going for some washing and dry brushing just on the dirt, it just kind of looks a little bit kind of stuck on there. And dry brushing tufts as well goes a long way. So criticism out of the way. I really, really like these guys. I think you've done a good job on them. They're nice and fun, good composition and stuff. And I would have liked to have seen a picture of them all together, to be honest. But I think just like wazzing through the photos, you could tell that it's quite coherently put together little project. Just one like encompassing level of confusion is like you've done the faces where there are indeed faces. So like Dory's face, Gloin's probably got the best one, like super duper small, but you've got great texture in there and great highlighting and shadows and stuff. But then that doesn't appear anywhere else on the armor or the weapons or anything. So like, how is the level of detail? I mean, it's great that you've gone to this level of detail, because where there is a painted face, you know, that's where all of the attention is going, because you know the attention to detail is so much higher. I just don't get why you didn't take it that far on the fabrics and the metals and the weapons, like, because you can clearly do it, because these are great faces, man. These are great little faces. They're bloody tiny, and you've done an ace job of them. So yeah, I'd love to see you put the full effort, like 100%, into the rest of them. These things would look super duper awesome. But yeah, otherwise, Scott, really really nice, great job. So thanks for submitting it, man. Cool pink glasses. I've just realised one set of pink glasses. Sweet. All right, let's move up. Once my Facebook thing does its reset thing that it likes to do. Thanks very much. Right, Hampus Broman, new to NMNs, but rather happy with what he managed here. And you should be happy with it, because it looks really, really good. So starting with the metals first, it's cool how you've done the steel, not looking like a super highly polished with loads of interference colours. There's lots of colours around them, like the browns and the purples and the greens and the blues, and it's not really showing up, which gives us the impression that this is quite a tarnished metal, but not got to the point of ruin, of being all rusted up. So quite believable. That's nice. But then on more polished things like the weapons, you are getting some interference colours in there. So really, really nice attention to detail. Those three elements form a nice green triangle around him, which is a great way that you've sucked the focus up there. Just would have thought maybe green might have been a better idea for the eye, maybe just to kind of polish off that triangle. But the red does still look good, so completely a choice kind of observation there rather than a criticism. The leather on the cape's looking really good. It just it sells as leather just about, but I think that's because of the sculpt. The painting is very good so far, but I think you could just take it that little bit further with very, very like off-white or bone-coloured sort of scratching and hashing, particularly around the edges where this would be worn and tattered, as Alex was saying earlier, where leather flexes, it tends to crack. So yeah, getting some more of those tones, very, very fine, you know, flow improver, retarder, you know, detail brush, all of the above, squish, scratch everywhere. Particularly in the highlight areas as well, because it would be more noticeable in the light as opposed to when it's tucked up in the shadows. And then if you were to put some like darkened tones to like give the appearance that this has been dragged through the sewers and is all grimy and muddy and slimy and disgusting, that would be a cool opportunity on there. But like the top from the front, that leather's looking really, really good. Better on the front here where it's more lit. So yeah, but just a few more scratching textures would really sell that nicely. Going to the flesh, like the way that you've highlighted it, it's got a good volumetric highlighting, good variation into it. I like the shallow colour that you've used, kind of bringing some of that blue into there. That's really nice. And matching the rat that's down at the bottom, but he's more saturated. Kind of a cool move. I think that ties those two together really, really nicely. And bringing the greens into the base, away from the tufts. I'm talking about the sort of the rocks and the stones that he's on. That's really, really nice. Sets the scene really well. Compositionally, it's very strong. And I thought the only opportunity really to improve that would be to deepen some of the recesses. It could be just a little bit darker, like between the bricks in some places, and put some streaking, griming, dripping nastiness. Like this would be quite corroded. This brass or bronze hook that's here, hoop that is here. You know, some more corrosion on that. Some running rust. Grime and slime seeping between the cracks and running down would be a cool opportunity. Anything else did I have there? I think not. No. So yeah, nice one, Hampers. This looks really good, and for first getting into NMM, this is really, really strong. So keep it up, man. You've got got the fundamentals down really, really nicely, and yeah, you're going to go places with NMM. Well done, Matt.
Yeah, no, all of the above. I really liked it. I think that the maybe with the base, if the whole base was a bit darker, I'd be kind of happier with it. Just in terms of it's like, you know, you got a lot of volumetric shadow on him, but you kind of would imagine the thing he's climbing on should be casting shadows down here, and like having stuff down there lit. Like we're not meant to be looking down there, so if it was just generally darker, because really you've got a great unit of focus of him kind of above the ground, but then you've almost told us the ground is sort of equally important because it's equally highlighted. But that's a stylistic thing. Like maybe it's just a match with your army or whatever. But it's a really, really cool looking piece.
Yeah, and just one thing for me that I thought was really, really nice about the metallics is how you've got that sort of green leaching into it. Whether it's meant to be sort of reflected color from the poison that's on them, or a representation of sort of poison leaching into the blades themselves and making them tainted metal. Either way, it looks really cool. I think it's a really, really good effect. Just maybe a few more glint highlights. I know it's sort of you're wanting it to look not quite polished, perfect metal, and it wouldn't be. But just to help that non-metallic sell a little bit better. That's sort of just those few little pure white sort of, even if it's just on these sort of edges on these like pointy parts along the blades, just to really, really sort of make it obvious that more obvious than it already is that it's metal. Non-metallics is always a slightly not quite true to reality interpretation of metals to try and make it sell. And just one other thing that I think would make them pop a little bit more and sort of really sell that grungy atmosphere with very minimal effort would just be glazing some browns into the shadows and those sort of dark patches on the metals, just to sort of help sell that atmosphere. You've got quite a nice slightly bluey greeny colour to the metals themselves, which sells the atmosphere itself and sort of the reflected colours of the environment that he's in this sort of poisonous, not quite nice area. But just a little bit of almost like dirtiness in the shadows. When we were talking about this yesterday, I couldn't remember the name of the model I was thinking of for it, but it's Darren Latham's Ica Claw. Has really nice sort of brown shadows, which the non-metallic sort of feels almost in that sort of Darren Latham-y style. So just leaning into that even, just to help it have that little bit more grunginess. But you know, for a sort of new sort of first or very sort of early attempt at non-metallics, saying you're rather happy with it, I'd be rather happy with it as well. I think it looks really nice. Overall, I think it's a very nicely painted little model there. So well done. Moving up now, Matt, are we...
Yeah, do you want to skip on to Alessandro? Because I know everything.
There's nothing more you can teach me.
Yes. So when we had the footage that didn't quite go well yesterday, we sort of went through Matt and Jim's submissions, but I feel like we've talked through them to death, so we'll just skip over those. So we've got Alessandro Alessandro. Okay. Even offsetting how we're sort of doing it by skipping Matt's, still get stuck with the names that I'm struggling with. So we've got a little Yoda here. So just sort of going sort of general feedback, nothing sort of particularly sort of asked for, but yeah. So I like what you've got going here. I think especially the lighter beigeish color of his cloak, particularly at the back where it's that's the main sort of volume there. That's visible. I think that's really, really nice. I like how you picked out the volumes there and sort of shaded it. It feels like a soft fabric, which works. You know, I think that Yoda's cloak is meant to be sort of like a woolly cotton, but as a model this small, the textures just don't do it. So the fact that there's none of that texture to sort of show it off isn't a problem at all. I wouldn't recommend trying texture on such a small model. It's 32mm scale and he's half size, so no worries about that at all. But on that note of the size, it is hard to have some of the separation of details on his front, where you've got this dark brown fabric. Again, I think that comes down to the size of the model largely, but a little bit more recess shading to help just differentiate that out a little bit, just to sort of break those areas up, would help with readability. It's nicely painted. It just sort of all blends into one piece on that front view. So probably your best bet here would be oil washes, just because it is so small. Trying to go in with a sort of, even with a very fine tip brush and paint in those recess shades would be very, very tricky. And sort of applying an all over sort of GW shade type wash is probably going to muddy the tones up, because again it's so small that those recesses aren't as deep as they would be on the same model but scaled up. So an oil wash where it has that sort of broken down surface tension and the capillary action that just pulls the wash right into the crevices and basically does all of the work for you in terms of keeping it clean and tidy, would be really, really useful here, just to help break up that volume. The skin, I like the color tone for it. I think you've got a nice sort of value contrast there in sort of the richness of his face. There's not too much I'd sort of change there. Again, it's a very small model, so the amount of detail you can get in there is limited. But maybe a few glazes of some color around his nose or around his ears, just to sort of bring in that little bit more life to it. Green flesh tone is a little bit hard to work with in terms of bringing in those red tones without it looking a bit too stark, just because red will look out of place, sort of jump out at you next to green. But you can probably get very, very sort of almost filter level, tint level glazes, just to bring that little bit more life in. But overall, I think it's really nice. I think something we all picked up on yesterday was that hair looked a little bit funky, but that's entirely down to the sculpt. You know, Yoda in the films has quite wispy hair. You can see his scalp through it and everything. So there's really no way to get around that. You can't sculpt wispy hair. So I think what you've done with it is fine, but that's just a point of I don't like the sculpt very much in that case. But I'd say it's something to not worry about at all, because you can't do anything about it at that point. But yeah, no, I think overall it's a nice piece for the size, especially. You've got it, really well painted there. Everything's sort of cleanly painted and all within the lines. I know if I were painting something this small, I'd smudge paint everywhere. So well done in that regard, especially. Jim?
Yeah, as above, I think one other thing we talked about yesterday was the color for the cloak being better. Did you mention that just now on the back than on the front?
Volume's better. Color didn't mention. So
yeah. So I just think that on the back it seems a lot lighter. So this, they're kind of mismatching together, these three garments that he's got. He's got the main bodies piece, this belt bit around the middle, and obviously the cloak thing. So I think we just need to lighten the tones on this, and it'll be a lot stronger. It could also do something else with this band across his middle, maybe make that a bit darker than what's covering his legs and chest. Just to split those tones apart and give it some variation. Also, another thing, I'll always say it, black out the rim. Always black the rim, especially when there's a lot of brown on the model, because it's just amalgamating a bit too much. So I think huge difference, huge improvement would be made just by blacking out the rim. If it's part of a larger army or something that's all brown, then perhaps maybe not. But if it's just an individual piece, then yeah, I'd say always black out the rim, man. Yeah, but otherwise it looks cool. The green skin particularly is very, very strong on this. Forget about the hair, doesn't matter. But yeah, for scale, you've done really, really nicely, Alessandro. So well done, Matt.
Yeah, I think it's really good, especially working in the boundaries of you trying to represent Yoda as he appears in the film, kind of things. And so. But I would say don't be afraid to use some artistic license. Like, I mean, there's all different versions of Yoda, from like puppets to CG to like the Clone Wars to animated things. If he could have more than one outfit. If you're having an issue, we could pretend his belt was like a yellow one that day. I don't think anyone noticed. Like, I was looking at some versions of him, he doesn't even have a belt. So, feel free if you are having an issue. Like, trying to paint a model to look interesting all in brown is hard. He's all in brown to make him look drab and beaten down in the original films. So if that's what you're going for, fine. And if not, you can always change things up because it's your model, and he looks good. Cool. So I'll carry on. Jim, did you? Looks great.
Thanks, man. Thank you very much. Apart from the
Cool. And
bracer,
then we have
which sucks. So we'll just move on.
we move to learning experience, a learning opportunity. That bracer. That's you don't say anything sucks.
Damn the bracer.
Young what you call it? Okay, so Jeffrey Phillips has Horticulus Slimux in a new painting style. Unless you know what is new about it, I'm gonna guess it's a lot more vibrant. This guy's normally all just kind of green and stuff. Looks really good. It's a cool take on it. It looks like a nudibranch, they're called, like a sea slug. They're actually often these really vibrant kind of colors. And we all thought that the spirally shell thingy with the orange and red in the center of it looks very like lava like, and it's super appropriate for this like demon snail that it's like full of molten guts or whatever inside, and the fact that the orange is carried through into its feet and things, and the rider, and the fact that the base is very volcanic. Did not talk about the base. We ended up talking about the base so much yesterday.
We did.
But yeah, it looks like it's kind of basalt, so everything is kind of helping us to really, like, you've done a really great job selling this kind of lava effect, if that's what you're going for, and I assume it is. Couple of things you could improve that aren't on the base. Tree on his shell thing looks a little bit dull. Again, anything that's mostly brown. Brown is the color of boredom. You paint things brown when you want people to not look at them. So it has a few little elements of like kind of moss and kind of there's some cool lava in it as well. But you could paint on more, or you could sculpt on more if you wanted. But you could like paint on like little patches of that bluey moss on them, to show that it's growing there, and you could add in extra lava in like the crevices and stuff. You don't have to go perfectly with what is there on the model. And you could also do some sort of gradient on it, like if the tips of the branches went to black or to white to like ivory kind of thing, just to give it more of an interesting look to it than just being, flat wood kind of thing. And his weapon has the same issue, and also we're a bit confused by what kind of material it is because it looks painted the same as the wood, but it's meant to be like metal or bone or something spikier. And it's just a little bit confusing. The rider looks really good. He's got a bit of that internal flamey thing going on. Again, it's like an alternate take on Nurgle. Like instead of having horrible goopy intestines, he's got like liquidy lava-y ones, and that's pretty cool. It's a little bit hard to distinguish him from the cloth that he is sitting on because they are the same color, like almost exactly. So like oftentimes I'd recommend using less colors for things, but like if anything on the model could be brown, I think that like the little thing that he's sitting on could just be a kind of a brown or gray or some other color. Because if you put two objects of the exact same color against each other, you have to work a lot harder in terms of your highlights and shades and or textures in order to make the objects contrast with each other. Whereas it's very easy if they're just a different color. Yeah, but I really like him. I love what's happening with he's like plowing the ground behind him. I think that's on sleeping on it. That's what he's meant to be doing. And it's definitely a super interesting take on the model. I haven't seen one done like this before, and I think I prefer it to the normal one. Variety is the spice of life. It's cool to have a big colorful Nurgle snail. Anything you guys want to add?
Yeah, just one thing I know we've said to sort of not pay too much attention to the base, even though we did spend quite a lot of time talking about it yesterday, because it's not done yet. But just one thing to mention on the stone is you've got your stone is very much a neutral grey, and stones are grey, but they're not grey. They're sort of very greyed out, desaturated other colours. So whether you've got some greens or blues worked in there, or some sort of yellowy tones and things, or because he's got this sort of fire look to him, and he's sort of ripping up the ground, maybe some sort of black sort of sooty dust or anything like that just worked into the stone so it's not so grey would be nice. Just something to consider going forward, sort of finishing the piece. And then something from me that sort of felt like a missed opportunity was on the wood, on the tree part, where you've got these sort of bits of hot lava or heat boils or whatever it is, sort of on there. I think we like Matt said, we're not entirely sure if it's meant to be sort of hot and sort of internal flame type look, or if you've just gone with a sort of orangey color for it. But the way you sort of got that reverse highlighting of the white in the middle really suggests you're going for heat there. So I'd just sort of add a little bit of charring around the wood, because wood burns. It sounds simple, it sounds obvious, but it's one of those things that sort of you just in the process of painting you just might not have considered. But a little bit of sort of glazing of some sort of really dark brown or even sort of or very near black sort of around there just to give it that sooty color would work really really nicely to just add that little bit of extra detail. But yeah, no, it's a nice piece. Jim?
Yeah, as above. I think there was only one other thing, which was that there's a nice amount of black near the what we believe to be fire effect, apart from around the feet. So I think if you were to have some sort of going through down through this red color that you've got in the shell, and then sort of really deep, and then going through to the black, I think that would be nice if you added some of those colors as well down in the feet, because they're looking just a little bit sort of paled out in comparison to the rest of it. So even like around the eyes, you got this nice thin black line around the eyes. So yeah, that was the only other thing that the guys haven't mentioned already that stood out on me. But otherwise, really cool. Love that plow effect and the colours on it, and a great take on this dude. So nice one, Jeffrey. Thanks for submitting it. Okay, John Israel is our last submission. So sneaking in on the wire. But this is Motorized Bounty Hunter from Infinity Line. Wants to go to competition and would like all criticism in line with that. So both barrels loaded for you, John. Here we go. Thanks very much for your time. Overall, I think the composition is pretty challenging in that we've got a white body for the bike. Whereas the rest of her is black, I think it would have been much better if those colours were completely switched around. So you've got a much darker bike because you don't want that really to be the main focus of the piece, whereas at the moment it is. And you've had to try and like scrape back the attention by making her face super, super bright. And I think that's kind of given her more of a washed out pale complexion than perhaps she should have. She almost looks like Jokerish, and it doesn't all get... Gaia, is that the Japanese geisha? That's the one. Sorry, kind of, and it doesn't really fit with the rest of the cyberpunk type theme. So it's a bit of a challenge there. So I mean, harsh, but you know, if you said competition, so that's what happens. Sorry, man. But what you've done, like the panel modulation and stuff on the bike, is really really nice. This glow that you've got coming from the tail light is pretty damn superb down onto that tire. That's really really cool. Nicely done there. And where it comes up her back, we noticed yesterday it's a bit strong, a bit too far away. So like this intensity of this thrown magenta light is a bit too strong up here. It should be that kind of strength down here, and then it should fade away. It doesn't seem to be much on her butt, but there seems to be more of it going up her back. But based on the shape of the light, we kind of decided that that would throw in all directions because it's kind of flat. Also down on her leg in the shadows, her supporting leg, there should definitely be some OSL shining up down here in the shadows, not in the bright spots. So you'd have your bright spots where the environmental light's coming in, then you'd have like a dark ring of shadow, an occlusion shadow, and then it would be into your magenta and then fading away into deep black, sort of around each of those shapes. So I hope I've explained that correctly, but yeah, that would definitely be present on this leg, maybe on that side as well. Really really liked what you did with the hair. That's a beautiful cascade of hair, and picked out the highlights for it really well. Let's just flip it around. Here we go. Just didn't love how abruptly it goes to white right at the tips. correct use of color, like where you've put the white, it's maybe a little bit strong at the end though. So I think if you were to rake that back into the mid-tones and just have a few like strands at the end picked out. You could also pick some of these out, not with the bright white, but just push this kind of this blonde color, which you really nailed the blonde. I think it's a lovely tone for blonde in general. So really well done with the hair. Look at it from that side; it looks great. Then onto the metals. They're a bit of a challenge because they look quite similar to the black, so they need to be highlighted more. So it looks like you've got the highlights in the right place as it is, but you need secondary reflections, especially going for competition. So everything's kind of got the one singular highlight at the moment. So you need to bring in secondary reflections of this. Think about the way the light would come in and it would hit that concave surface and it would bounce back up. There would be more lights in here. And on all of these basically, and on these surfaces as well, lights come down and it's bounced off of here, but there's nothing inside this shadow. You've painted the reflection there, but it's not gone back into that shadow there. So that's the kind of thing at competition you really need to exploit those surfaces and how the light would behave with them. I like the modulation and stuff that you did with the red. Red's quite a tricky colour to paint, but you've highlighted that and shaded it quite nicely, so well done there. Just could have done with slightly blacker outline. I think just separate the elements and add definition. The freehands are cool, nice work with those. I think we were struggling to understand the blueness of the handlebars, whether that was supposed to be like a more shiny silver or metal in general, but it just kind of looks a bit blue, and compositionally it was a bit confusing, so it's not really selling as bright or more polished metals than the others. So you may just want to tone back the blue on that. It looks like quite a rich, like supermarine blue that's been used in it, or ultramarine blue rather. But it might just be a picture thing, a lighting thing, I'm not sure. But yeah, that stood out a little bit. And then I think the final thing that I was going to say was the face in general. So it's gone really white, as I said before, but a competition, you need to get this face really bang tidy. And if we're really harsh and we zoom right in, like the outlines around our eyes are a bit too thick, they're not quite level, and I don't really know what the scale was on this. Was there a scale you mentioned? But the pupils look, no, there wasn't a scale, but it's probably what, an 80 mil base, maybe. Maybe a 60.
Yeah, they're like 28 mil scale.
Right, so hyper tiny, but yeah, getting some color in the iris if you've got magnifying glasses or a big lens with a light on it. Getting some color in the irises is pretty much mandatory for competition level. So push, practice, try, just to get that face a bit crisper and cleaner. And she needs more life in the face, more red tones and stuff, which is a challenge because of the color of the bike. But I think with practice you could do it, man. All in all, I mean, that's being hypercritical, because actually when you zoom out, and yeah, it is very nicely done, very nicely painted. Just yeah. For competition, you're going to get harsh critique, man. Sorry. Did you guys want to add to that?
The biggest thing for me in terms of sort of looking at it as a competition piece, the first one is, like you've already mentioned, the focus isn't quite there. I know you've already mentioned it, but competition, it really bears thinking about how you're going to compose the piece with that focus. For me, looking at this, the only place my eye has ever settled the whole time looking at the photos is on the freehand on the bike. Occasionally it jumps to the side to these sort of pink lights, but that's where the focus is, and that's not where we want it to be. And the other thing was the base. Love what you've done with the base. I like the elements you've got. Sort of the painted on sort of road paint arrow there, how it's sort of weathered and chipped, and these little sort of ruffled, sort of weathered and torn sort of posters and flyers on the floor. Really love what you've done with it, but you could sort of bring it in by 0.5 centimeter to 1 centimeter on each side, in each sort of in each direction in the diameter, and sort of it would be a tighter piece. For me, the base is a little bit too big for the model. Even if it were an oval base, that would work better. So you've still got that length to fit the bike on, but it's not so wide because you've got a lot of negative space in front of the bike there. That's doing nothing for the piece. And for competition, not even sometimes it's not just about what you've sort of added to the model. It's not about what you've taken away from the model. It's what's doing nothing for the model, and that negative space is doing nothing for the piece, which makes it overall just that little bit weaker. If we could just the way you've painted it with that nice base, that display base is almost, you can almost think of it as a mini diorama, and a very good rule to follow with that is using the absolute minimum required space possible to sell the story, and not a millimeter more. And that's how you get the tightest composition. To me, that's just something that I would pick up on, sort of with that very very harsh, very sort of fine tooth comb competition critiquing that you've basically asked for. So no complaints. Matt.
Yeah, so I agree with all the above, and it's a very, very nice model. So we're being a bit rough on you. So we're not trying to be, mean or anything like that. But you've obviously got a lot of painting skills. So we're just trying to think of something that you could do to improve what is already very good. And on the base, I think this model comes on this base, like it's a display thingy. Um, so maybe for your competition, you like needed to have it on that. But if not, like Alex is definitely right. Like an oval base, or like even if you literally cut this on diameter, so it's like a half circular base. Because the other thing is, when you have a round base, that suggests that we're meant to be able to look at this model from every angle. Whereas if you had like a square base, that like we tell that we are meant to look at it from the front and from the back. We're not really meant to be looking at it like down the length of the motorcycle. So having a round base isn't like doing that much for you, apart from creating a lot of negative space. And you've done a good stuff with the space that's there. But if it's not adding, especially for competition, anything that's not adding to your piece is subtracting from your piece. That's a good way of thinking about it. Yeah, I think it's really well done. I'd like if the glowy light on the tail light is so good. I'd like if there was more of it in the front wheel, like if the entire front wheel maybe was lit up, or if it had more OSL in it, and kind of think about what your focus is in the piece. Like that looks great. Like, is the piece meant to be about that, or is it meant to be at the freehand of the bike, which is also really good. It feels like you were really interested in the bike and not so much in the lady. I understand that the face is very awkward to deal with. If you had a helmeted head for her instead, that would change everything entirely, but then you wouldn't be able to show off your hair. So yeah, we're not really picking into the technical elements. We think you're doing really well on that. But for competition pieces, it's often more to do with how you have constructed the artwork in your mind and then kind of made that real afterwards. But it looks really good altogether. And good luck if you are in a competition in the future. Let us know what we can do to help you do as best as you can in it. Okay, so that takes us to the end. Thanks very much for everyone who submitted their models. We know it's not easy to put your work out there for people like us to him and haw over. We always enjoy reviewing it, and we hope we've given everyone some useful feedback. Thanks a million for sticking through to the end of this video, which you did if you are hearing me talk. Reviews for next month are already open for August this month. It's Unit, and if you don't know what PmP is, we're on Facebook. Look it up. It's a free to enter group. Just fill out the questions, and we'd be very happy to review your artwork in next month's review or in anyone in the future. Thanks for coming by.